The steam curled through the marble-tiled bathroom like a ghost clinging to the mirror, softening the sharp lines of a space too sterile to feel like home. Water dripped steadily from his hair, tracing the path along his spine. Each droplet a cold reminder that no matter how hot the shower, it never reached beneath his skin. Jonathan Wolfe stood still, unmoving, as if the water could strip something away besides the sweat of his morning workout. He did not wrap a towel around himself. He did not reach for one. He simply stood staring ahead at nothing as condensation gathered around him like an invisible shell. He had forgotten what it felt like to be warm, not just in the physical sense, but the kind of warmth that seeped into you, the kind that stayed. He stepped out slow and methodical, his movements rehearsed after years of muscle memory. The edge of the towel rack caught his eye, but he ignored it. He always did. Towels were brought, not taken. That was the rule. No reaching, no contact, no unexpected shifts in temperature, texture, sensation. He inhaled, exhaled, counted to 3. The routine helped, or at least that was what the therapists had said. Structure grounds the mind. But before he could reach the doorway, there was a sound behind him. Soft, almost imperceptible. The door opening just enough to let in a draft of air, and then footsteps, light, hesitant. She had not knocked. He turned his head sharply, his reflexes still trained to react to the unpredictable. But there was no threat, no confrontation. Only a woman standing at the edge of the room, arm outstretched holding a neatly folded towel. She didn't speak. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The towel was a soft gray, his preferred color. She had folded it the way he liked, tight edges, aligned, one side slightly creased for ease of grip. How had she known, he almost asked, but the words stuck in his throat like ash. She crossed the threshold slowly, steps measured as if walking through a memory she was afraid to disturb. Her eyes met his just for a second, calm, unwavering, but enough to slice through the silence like a pulse. When she reached him, she did not extend the towel immediately. Instead, she waited. Her fingers curled gently around the fabric knuckles, pale, but not tense. He did not move to take it. The steam between them felt thicker than air. Then, without a word, she stepped closer just enough to close the final inch. Her arm lifted. She raised the towel not in offering, but in gesture until it grazed the side of his shoulder. The fabric met his skin like a whisper. It was not a touch of urgency, not necessity, just presence. Her fingers did not brush his body, only the towel did. And yet his breath caught, his chest tightened. Because somehow that one moment, that one careful contact of cloth and intention felt more like touch than anything he had allowed in a decade. She unfolded the towel slowly and reached up, dabbing gently at the droplets along his temple. He watched her hand move precise and reverent. His body did not flinch, it absorbed. The warmth of the towel had faded quickly in the air, but his skin burned where it had been. Not from heat, from memory, from realization. He could not remember the last time someone had wiped water from his skin. She stepped back then. Not far, just enough to return the distance. She did not bow her head or wait for approval. She turned toward the door quiet as she had entered. But just before she left, she said without turning, "You looked cold," and then she was gone. Jonathan stood there, towel in hand, water still dripping from his elbows onto the floor. Something inside him shifted. Not like a wave, not like a crash, but like the creaking of a locked door finally starting to give. The mirror had fogged completely now, obscuring the man who usually stared back. Maybe that was a mercy, because today, for the first time in years, he had not looked at himself. He had looked at her, and he had felt something. Not desire, not shock, but touch, real, undeniable. Oh, unfamiliar. He stared down at the towel in his hands, now slightly damp. It carried no perfume, no embroidery. It was ordinary in every way, except it had come from her hands, except it had broken the rule, except it had reached him. He pressed the towel to his face and inhaled. It smelled of clean cotton and faint citrus, and something else, something impossible to name. Maybe it was warmth, maybe it was presence, maybe it was her. Whatever it was, it lingered, and that scared him more than the silence ever had. The job listing had been oddly worded. Live-in domestic assistant needed. Absolute discretion required. No prior experience necessary. Must be comfortable with silence. Isla Rivera reread the email 3 times before daring to believe it. The pay was almost insulting in its generosity. $10,000 a week. No childcare, no meal prep, no driving. Just presence organization and punctuality. The instructions were simple. Apply in person. No resume, no references. Just a signed NDA and proof of identification. She had stared at the screen in her tiny apartment, the whir of the box fan overhead, doing little to cool the summer heat. Her sister coughed softly from the bed beside her. Isla glanced over. Anna had lost weight again. The treatments weren't working, and the hospital bills had swallowed everything Isla had managed to save. Even the old food truck she used to run had been sold. She had nothing left to trade but time, and time was exactly what this job seemed to demand. So she packed a small bag and went. She didn't expect the mansion perched on the cliffside above Monterey Bay. She didn't expect the silence that hit her the moment the iron gates shut behind her, swallowing the outside world whole. And she definitely didn't expect the man who answered the door himself. No house manager, no assistant, just him, tall, cold, perfectly sculpted in every way that made him feel inhuman. Jonathan Wolfe looked at her like she was a package delivered to the wrong address, yet he let her in. He said nothing for the first full minute, just studied her as if she might break the silence with something vulgar like small talk. She didn't. Instead, she handed him the signed NDA and waited. That seemed to earn her his approval. He led her through corridors of stone and glass, explaining nothing, pointing out only the boundaries she was not to cross. The west wing was off limits. So was the garden after dark. The kitchen was hers to manage, but not for him. He ate alone. Meals were to be prepared, left on the tray table, and never discussed. No knocking on his door, no cleaning his study, no entering his room under any circumstances. Every instruction was delivered in the same low, detached voice, as if reading terms and conditions from a document he had long memorized. Isla only nodded. She didn't ask why he needed someone to live there. She didn't ask why she was the only one present in a house meant for 10. She had worked with patients before trauma, PTSD, obsessive-compulsive tendencies. She knew the signs. But nothing in her nursing years had prepared her for the way this house felt. Not haunted, just hollow, as if the rooms were waiting for someone who never came back. She was shown to a guest suite on the second floor. Minimalist but comfortable. Large windows faced the ocean. A single book rested on the bedside table, something about silence and its psychological implications. That first night she unpacked in silence, ate alone in silence, fell asleep to silence so thick it felt physical. The second morning she began her tasks, organizing storage, dusting glass shelves filled with unread books, wiping down countertops that gleamed with disuse. Every movement was methodical. She was good at this. She didn't take up space. She was there, but not intrusive. A presence, not a disturbance. On the third day, she passed him in the hallway for the first time. He didn't acknowledge her, but he stopped walking. Just for a moment, then he kept going. On the fourth, she heard him pacing at night. The creak of floorboards, the rhythm exact, not frantic, not restless, controlled, rehearsed. On the fifth day, she placed a cup of tea outside his study. Not because he asked, just because she noticed his hands had been shaking slightly when he passed her in the kitchen that morning. The cup was untouched when she returned, but the next day he moved it closer to the edge, making it easier for her to take back. That was his version of thank you. She understood. It became their unspoken routine. Small gestures exchanged in silence. A blanket folded, a door left open for fresh air, a newspaper placed beside his chair folded to the page about global markets. Not once did they touch. Not once did he speak beyond what was necessary. But Isla saw him. Not the billionaire recluse the tabloids had called cold and broken. She saw the way his shoulders tensed when she walked past, the way his gaze lingered on her hands when she typed on her tablet in the kitchen, the way he flinched when she accidentally dropped a spoon. He wasn't cold, he was cautious, wounded in ways people stopped trying to understand. And Isla had long ago learned not to take silence personally. Her sister barely spoke anymore, not since the treatments began to fail. Isla had cared for her through pain, through deterioration, through long nights of holding her hand while the machines beeped. Silence was not the enemy. Indifference was. Jonathan Wolfe was not indifferent. He was watching, waiting, testing the world one moment at a time to see if it would hurt him again. And so she stayed. One day became 2, then 5, then 10, and still they did not speak of anything that mattered. But they existed beside each other. And in a world where touch had become a weapon and sound a liability, sometimes simply existing was the most honest thing two people could do. Then came the morning with the towel, the moment where it all changed, the moment her presence crossed the threshold from background to something undeniable. She had not meant to startle him. She had only meant to help. But in that moment, something old inside him cracked. Something long buried stirred. And Isla, without knowing it, had passed the first test. Not by avoiding his silence, but by daring to break it with something gentler than words, touch, or at least the memory of it. After the morning with the towel, nothing between them was said, yet everything had shifted. The rules were not rewritten, but something unspoken was now allowed. Isla continued her duties without change in pace or expression, and Jonathan continued to avoid eye contact in passing. But the silence between them was no longer void. It was full charged with something electric, yet undefined. He noticed small things first, the way she adjusted the thermostat before dawn so the marble floors would not be as cold under his bare feet. The way she began placing the tea on the opposite side of the tray so he would not need to turn it around with shaking fingers. The way she never stood directly in his path, never moved quickly near him, always approached from the side with deliberate softness. These were not coincidences, these were choices, considered, thoughtful, and they did not go unnoticed. He never thanked her, couldn't. That word still stuck in his mouth like bone. But he responded in his own ways. One morning she found the tea already poured, not made by her but by him. The cup was warm, the color just right, the honey stirred in. Isla smiled just slightly and drank it at the kitchen island in silence while he read across from her. Neither said a word, neither had to. The next week she entered the laundry room and found her favorite sweater, folded differently from how she had left it. Less rigid, the way she used to fold her sister's clothes, after hospital visits, soft corners, warmth tucked into the sleeves. Jonathan had touched it, not much, not obviously, but enough to learn, to offer something in return. Their gestures grew in subtlety and in meaning. One evening as the sun bled over the cliffs outside the kitchen window, Isla was wiping the sink when she heard a faint sound behind her. A breath sharp and short. She turned to see Jonathan standing at the edge of the doorway, holding something in his hand. A broken glass. His palm was bleeding, not much but enough to bead and run down his fingers. She stepped toward him. He didn't flinch, didn't pull back, just watched her approach like a man watching an eclipse, not sure whether to look away or burn. She reached for the small first aid kit tucked behind the cabinet. She had stocked it herself methodically, as she always did. He sat on the bar stool, resting his hand on the counter. His eyes never left hers. Isla worked in silence, cleaning the cut with gentle precision. Her fingers moved quickly, but not coldly. She never hesitated even when his breath hitched slightly at the antiseptic. She did not ask how it happened. She did not scold. She simply cared. That too was a choice. When she wrapped the gauze around his hand, he spoke for the first time in days. His voice was low, rough, uncertain. "Thank you." She paused, eyes lifting. "You're welcome." And for a moment, he did not look away. That night, she found the kitchen even cleaner than she had left it. The utensils aligned, the towels freshly laundered. The coffee pot filled for the morning. No note, no mention, but he had seen her care, and he had returned it. Another day as rain tapped gently on the windows. Isla stood near the fireplace staring at the flames. Jonathan entered quietly, stopping a few feet away. She offered him a blanket without turning. He took it. That was all. But the moment lingered like a scent in the room. He began to join her in the evenings, not in conversation, but in presence. He sat on the opposite end of the long couch while she read. Sometimes she read aloud, not to him, not expecting response, but simply to hear something other than silence. He never asked her to stop. One night she read a line that made her pause. Some people confuse stillness with emptiness, but some stillness is just full hearts catching their breath. She didn't look at him, but she felt it when he looked at her. Another night she found a book on her pillow, hardcover first edition, with her name written neatly on a note tucked inside. For the one who reads in silence. He was beginning to reach back, slowly, carelessly at first, then with purpose. One morning as she poured his tea, her hand brushed his wrist. It was unintentional, or maybe not, but he did not pull away. He looked at her hand, then at her, and said nothing. But something flickered in his eyes, hunger perhaps, not for her body, for permission, for the right to want again. Isla gave him space, but space was no longer the same as distance. It was choice, shared. One afternoon she was carrying a tray of clean linens up the stairs when she heard his voice behind her. Wait, it wasn't loud, but it stopped her in her tracks. She turned slowly. He was at the bottom of the stairs watching her, as if seeing her for the first time. "Are you afraid of me?" The question was unexpected and honest. She tilted her head slightly, then shook it. "No. Should I be?" His mouth curved not into a smile, but into something almost warmer. "No. But you should know I'm afraid of myself sometimes." She didn't respond immediately. She stepped down, lowering the tray to her hip. "We all are. That's why it matters when we still show up." He stared at her, and for the first time his gaze did not feel like scrutiny. It felt like searching. That evening she heard music playing faintly from his study. Piano, a piece she recognized, one that spoke of loss and memory and the long ache of wanting. It played softly, as if for her ears alone. Their routine deepened. Mornings became rituals. She brought tea. He asked about her sleep. Once she brought fresh flowers in from the garden. He touched a petal, then looked at her and said, "My mother used to keep these in the hallway. You remembered." Isla only nodded. The following day she found a photo in the hallway, framed, dust-free, of a woman holding a bouquet of the same flowers. He was letting her in one image at a time. Trust was not declared. It was built, and they were building it without realizing, until one night as a storm swept over the cliffs, knocking power lines and soaking windows. Isla lit candles in the hallway. Jonathan stood at the far end watching her. She looked up, their eyes met, no words, but everything that needed to be said was in that silence. The space between them now carried something delicate, charged and beautifully dangerous, not yet touch, not yet love, but something waiting, something that trembled in the air like lightning just before it strikes. The storm passed by, morning leaving the cliffs soaked, and the air heavy with the scent of salt and earth. The silence in the house felt different now, softer, as if it too had exhaled. Isla moved through her tasks like always, but her senses were sharper, attuned to the smallest changes in rhythm. She noticed how Jonathan lingered longer in rooms where she was, how he seemed to pause by doorways now instead of passing through them like a ghost. There was a weight in his presence, not oppressive but palpable, like heat before rain. One afternoon, as she dusted the shelves of the old music room, her fingers brushed against a thick leather-bound volume. She pulled it free gently. It was a photo album, elegant and worn. She hesitated, then opened it. The images inside were frozen fragments of a different Jonathan, younger with softer edges. One photo caught her breath. It was him sitting on the garden steps with a woman laughing barefoot, sunlight pouring over them like a secret. The woman was beautiful, her smile luminous. But what stunned Isla was not her, it was Jonathan, the way he looked at her, with everything. Isla closed the book slowly and returned it to the shelf, but the image lingered in her mind like a name she once knew. Later that evening, she found him in the kitchen, uncharacteristically still. The lights were dim, and a single glass of untouched wine sat beside him. She didn't say anything, just waited. After a long pause, he spoke, voice barely above the hush of the ocean wind outside. Her name was Evelyn, my wife. Isla stood quiet. He didn't look at her. I loved her more than I thought possible. She loved parts of me, not the broken ones, not the ones that came after. Isla didn't move. His fingers curled around the stem of the glass, then loosened. When the accident happened, I wasn't supposed to survive. But I did. He inhaled sharp and quiet. She didn't stay, left a note, said she couldn't handle what I'd become. Isla stepped forward, then slowly until she stood across from him. She didn't touch him, only listened. I stopped letting anyone near me after that, not out of pride, out of terror. I didn't want to be left again by someone who had seen me. Up close. He looked at her then, but you don't look away. She held his gaze. I see you. The words were soft, but they landed like thunder. He stood up suddenly, pacing. You must think I'm pathetic, hiding in this house, letting a stranger hand me a towel like it's the most intimate thing I've felt in years. Isla didn't flinch. I don't think you're pathetic. I think you're human. He stopped moving. She added, the most dangerous wounds are the ones no one sees. You've been bleeding inside for a long time. He looked down. Her voice was steady. And now you're letting someone close enough to notice. That's not weakness. That's survival. He looked at her like he wanted to believe her. But belief was not something he gave easily. She reached into her pocket and unfolded something small. A badge, old, worn, her name, her photo, from her days as a nurse. He took it, eyes narrowing slightly. You worked at Ridgewood Medical. She nodded. I was there 7 years ago. The night of your accident. I wasn't in your room. But I saw the chart, saw the hallway guarded like a crime scene. He exhaled. Isla met his gaze. I never planned to tell you. I took this job for the money, for my sister. But I stayed for a different reason, because I saw someone surviving when everyone else had left him for dead. His hand tightened around the badge. You knew, and you stayed. She nodded. He stepped back, eyes searching hers. Why? She smiled just a little. Because someone once stayed for me, and it saved my life. His face shifted then, not softened, not broken, just real, no mask, no armor, only the man underneath. The one who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen and not judged. He handed her back the badge. Keep it. It's part of your story. So is this. She took it, fingers brushing his just briefly, enough to ground, not enough to overwhelm. He spoke again, this time slower. That night 7 years ago, I kept whispering the same thing, over and over. Don't let them touch me. She nodded. I heard. I was in the hallway. You don't remember, but I've remembered every day since. He was silent. I didn't know why you said it, but I never forgot the way your voice broke. That was when I realized how deep it went. The fear, the pain, the isolation. He looked at her stunned. I don't remember you. Her voice didn't waver. That's okay. Sometimes people don't need to remember you to be changed by you. You were already starting to fight even when you were unconscious. That mattered. He stepped forward, then not quite close enough to touch, but close enough for the space between them to tighten. What if I can't be touched? What if I try and I fail? She met him without hesitation. Then try again, and if you still can't, I'll stay on this side of the silence with you, as long as it takes. His eyes darkened not with fear, but with the terrifying possibility of hope. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't asked for it. But now that it was here, it was unraveling every knot he'd built to hold himself together. And in the middle of that unraveling, he realized something. She had seen the worst of him before she'd seen the best. And still she stayed. That night, as he lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling, heart heavy, but no longer hollow. He remembered her hands, her voice, her patience. He remembered the towel, the moment, the crack in the wall he had built around himself. And for the first time in 7 years, he wondered if that wall was not protection, but a prison. Maybe it was time to learn how to leave it, not all at once, but piece by piece, with someone who had already slipped through the cracks. The following days unfolded like something between recovery and hesitation. Jonathan's walls had not come down entirely, but they no longer felt impenetrable. He began to speak more often, not always about himself, but about the world outside. He asked Isla's opinion on books, on the rain, on silence. He started drinking tea beside her instead of across the room. Sometimes he walked into a space and did not leave when he saw her there. He stayed, he listened, he even asked questions. She told him about her sister, about the food truck. She used to run about how she once believed she would grow old without ever trusting someone again. He didn't flinch at any of it. He just kept showing up. That in itself felt like a miracle. One night she fell asleep on the couch in the music room, book open on her chest. He entered, paused, and instead of waking her, covered her gently with a blanket. He sat beside her watching the fireplace dim and wondered what it would be like to reach for her hand. He didn't, but the thought no longer terrified him. It only lingered. The moment things shifted came not with noise, but with paper. He was working in his study when he opened a drawer he rarely touched. Inside was a stack of old personnel files from a past assistant search years ago. One name caught his eye. Rivera Isla. He paused, pulled the file. Inside were her original documents, not the ones she had handed in for this position, but an earlier application dated nearly 5 years prior. Her resume had included Ridgewood Medical. It wasn't the hospital she had mentioned, it was another one. A detail she had never offered, one she had quietly removed in her second attempt. His eyes narrowed. Why would she apply twice? Why hide that? Why change the story? His chest tightened. The old reflexes stirred. Not the fear of touch, but the fear of manipulation, of lies dressed in kindness. He placed the file back, but his hands were shaking. That night when Isla entered the kitchen to begin dinner, he was already there. The look in his eyes had changed. She noticed immediately. The silence had a different weight. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he held up the file. You applied once before. Why did you lie? Isla froze. I didn't lie. I omitted. There's a difference. He stepped closer. you changed your story. You removed Ridgewood from your history because I didn't want you to think I was here for you, for what you represented. I wanted to earn this place on neutral ground, but you knew who I was. You knew me before I even remembered you. I remembered the man in the hospital, yes. Not the billionaire, not the headlines. I remembered your voice, not your legacy. He scoffed a sound foreign in his own mouth. Convenient. Her jaw tightened. I could have said something the moment I arrived. I didn't. I never asked for anything from you. He stepped forward. No, you just watched. You waited. You knew all along what I had gone through. She held his gaze, and I respected your silence until you were ready to speak. That's not manipulation. That's care. He turned away, voice low. I let you in, and you built your way in with pieces you kept hidden. That's what this feels like. She took a breath. I didn't come here to save you. I came to survive. And somewhere along the way, I saw that you were trying to do the same. He looked back at her eyes, guarded. But I never got to choose what I knew about you. I never got to decide if I wanted someone who already had access to my pain. She nodded slowly. I understand. He said nothing, just stared, waiting for her to explain away the wound he now felt she had reopened. She didn't. Instead, she reached for her coat. I'll pack my things. He blinked. Just like that. You're leaving. I won't stay where I'm not trusted. And I won't fight to prove I had no hidden agenda. If you believe I stayed for anything other than honesty, then I've already lost you. She walked past him without another word. He didn't follow. Not then. Not that night. The house returned to its former silence, but it no longer felt like safety. It felt like absence. The tea remained untouched. The music stopped playing. The blanket on the couch stayed folded. Jonathan walked the hallways like a ghost in his own life. He opened the drawer again, read the file once more, this time slower. He noticed something. A line in her first application. My sister is undergoing treatment. This job would allow me to support her full-time. He flipped the page. A note from the old assistant manager. Candidate seems too emotionally involved in patient care. Might struggle with boundaries. He stared at it. The comment wasn't a red flag. It was a proof of her heart. She wasn't here to manipulate. She was here because she had nothing else. And yet she had given everything. That realization cut deeper than the suspicion ever had. He remembered the way she looked at him the night she left. Not angry, just tired, like someone who had spent years learning how to earn trust, only to watch it unravel in seconds. He sat on the edge of the fireplace and pressed his palms to his face. He had pushed away the one person who had never reached for him without asking first. Not because she lied, but because he was still afraid that someone might truly want him. Not the version of him he had buried in the headlines. And now she was gone. And the towel still hung in the bathroom, folded, undisturbed, like the memory of the moment they had begun. A memory he had shattered because fear still spoke louder than truth. The morning after Isla left the house returned to its familiar rhythm of silence, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was punishing. Every room felt colder. Every breath felt louder. The mug she used remained untouched beside the kettle. The corner of the couch where she always curled up with her book still held the soft imprint of her presence. Jonathan walked through the house like a man sleepwalking through a memory. The scent of her still lingered faintly in the hallway, a mix of lavender and something warmer, like sunlight trapped in fabric. He stood in the bathroom for a long time, staring at the towel she had folded and left hanging on the hook beside the shower. It hadn't moved since the morning she touched him. That morning had marked a beginning, and now the towel marked an end. He turned the shower on hot water pounding against his skin, but it didn't help. He kept waiting for the numbness to return. It didn't. The cut on his hand had started to heal, but the ache in his chest only deepened. By the third day, he stopped waiting for her to come back. By the fourth, he stopped drinking tea. On the fifth, he found himself standing outside the door to the room she had stayed in, hand hovering above the knob, heart pounding like it did the day of his accident. He pushed the door open slowly. It was clean, bare, empty. She had taken everything that was hers, but she had left behind a book on the nightstand. Inside was a scrap of paper, a list of things she had meant to do around the house. Replace the squeaky hinge, organize the back pantry, oil the piano keys. Beneath that was a line in her handwriting, small and quiet. I stayed because you were worth staying for. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the weight of her absence more solid than her presence had ever been. That evening, he walked to the old garden shed where no one had been in years. Inside, covered by a tarp, was a rusted metal bench, the same bench from the photo in the album, the one where he had once laughed barefoot in the sun. He dragged it out with bare hands, uncaring of the splinters or grime. He placed it near the edge of the cliffs where the wind was strongest. Then he sat, and he thought. He thought of every time he had chosen silence over truth, distance over risk. He thought of Isla's hands bandaging his of her voice, reading into the quiet of her presence that never asked but always offered. She had touched his life with the lightest fingers, and he had recoiled the moment it became real. But now he knew. He wasn't afraid of being used. He was afraid of being seen and still left behind. And Isla had seen him, fully, without armor, without masks, and she stayed, until he made it impossible for her to. The next morning he got in his car and drove. He didn't call, didn't warn, he just went. He remembered the name of the hospital where her sister was being treated. He had read it on a form in the folder she left behind. When he arrived, he walked in like a man on a mission. The nurse at the front desk raised an eyebrow. He asked for Isla Rivera. The nurse blinked twice, then pointed down the hall, room 12. He walked slowly, every step heavy, every breath uncertain. He didn't know what he would say. He only knew he had to be the one to say it. Not with perfect words, but with presence, with truth. He reached the room and paused. The door was ajar. Inside, Isla sat beside a hospital bed, gently adjusting the blanket. Around a sleeping woman, her sister, Isla looked tired, not weak, just worn, like someone who had been carrying too much for too long, without complaint. She looked up, their eyes met. She didn't move, neither did he. He stepped inside slowly. She stood. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She waited. I was wrong, he said finally. I thought you were hiding something, but I see now you were protecting something. Yourself, your sister, me. He stepped closer. You saw a broken man and didn't run. I saw a woman who had every reason to leave and stayed anyway. I punished you for knowing the worst of me when you never used it against me." His voice cracked. "And I've never regretted anything more in my life." Isla's eyes were still quiet, but not closed, not unforgiving. He swallowed. "I don't expect you to forgive me or come back, but I needed you to know that you were right. I didn't remember touch. I didn't remember warmth. Until you." He pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded piece of paper. It was the list she had left behind. "I found this. You never got to finish it." He held it out. She didn't take it yet. He added, "But I want to, with you. One day, one task at a time, if you'll let me." Silence stretched between them again. But this time it didn't hurt. She looked at him for a long time and he let her. He didn't rush. He didn't beg. He simply stood there, open and waiting. Then she stepped forward and took the paper. Her hand brushed his. He didn't flinch. She folded the list carefully and tucked it into her bag. "I still have the key," she said softly. "I never gave it back." He smiled barely. "Good, then let's go home." They returned to the house just before sunset. The road along the cliffs was quiet, the ocean calm as if mirroring the stillness between them. Jonathan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on his knee. Fingers tapping softly as though unsure what to do without the tight grip of tension he had carried for so long. Isla sat beside him, not speaking but not distant. The silence was no longer a barrier. It had become a language between them. When they arrived, he unlocked the front door and stepped aside to let her enter first. For the first time, she hesitated. He turned to her gently. "It's still your home, if you want it." She looked at him for a beat longer, then stepped inside. The scent was the same. The space was familiar. But something felt different. The air no longer held the sharp chill of isolation. It had softened, or perhaps she had. That evening, they didn't fall back into the same routines. They built new ones, together. She cooked for both of them, and he offered to help. It was awkward at first. He cut vegetables unevenly, spilled a glass of water, muttered curses under his breath when a pan hissed too loud. She only smiled. She didn't correct him, didn't laugh. She handed him another towel and let him try again. Later, they ate by the window facing the sea. He lit a single candle. She brought 2 mismatched mugs of tea. When he took his first sip, he made a face. "Too much honey." She raised an eyebrow. "I thought you liked it that way." He smiled, a small, shy thing. "I do. I just forgot what it tasted like when someone else made it." That night, she returned to her old room, not because she wanted distance, but because they were relearning each other. Slowly, with intention. The next morning, she woke to find a small folded note beneath her door. Just one line in his handwriting. "Meet me in the garden." She found him standing beside the bench he had dragged out days before now, cleaned and painted. He had added cushions. She sat beside him. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a set of keys. "What are those for?" she asked. He handed them to her. "The shed, the tools, the greenhouse. I thought maybe we could fix up some of the things you wanted to repair. Make this place ours." Her brows lifted. "Ours?" He nodded. "Not because I need you to stay, but because I want you to want to." She turned the keys in her hand slowly. What if I do? He looked at her. Then we start here. Today, one room at a time. They began with the pantry. It was a mess of expired goods and dust-covered jars. She organized while he wiped shelves. They moved in quiet rhythm, passing each other in the small space. Shoulders brushing, eyes meeting without awkwardness. He dropped a can of soup. She laughed. He stared at her, heart thudding, and laughed too. Not a forced sound, not a practiced one, but real, full, alive. Days passed. The garden came next. They planted herbs and flowers she had once mentioned. He remembered. She taught him how to handle roots, how not to overwater. He watched her fingers move through the soil, like she was coaxing life from the ground. And in a way she was. She was coaxing life from him. One night, as fog rolled in, they sat on the couch with a book between them. She read aloud. His arm brushed hers, then stayed. When she finished the chapter, he turned to her. I keep thinking about that morning, the towel, the way you looked at me. She said nothing. I didn't understand it then. But now I think I do. You weren't just handing me something to dry off. You were offering a chance to feel again, and I almost ruined it. She reached for his hand. You didn't. You paused. That's allowed. His fingers curled around hers. I'm still learning. She smiled. So am I. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to. The space between them was already intimate. Touch had returned. But more than that, trust had bloomed. He began composing again. Music, soft pieces that he played quietly in the mornings. She listened from the kitchen while brewing tea. Sometimes she hummed along. Other times she danced barefoot across the cool tiles, moving like someone who had finally found a rhythm worth following. One afternoon he found her sketching something in the study. He peeked over her shoulder. A small drawing of the house, but warmer, more alive. Flowers in the windows, curtains open, a woman standing at the door, a man sitting on the bench. He looked at her. Is that us? She nodded. It could be. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. Then let's make it true. They began working on a plan, a new space on the property, a community greenhouse, a quiet corner for healing, for people like them, people who had forgotten touch, forgotten hope, forgotten themselves. They wrote down ideas, drew sketches, reached out to contacts. He funded it, she designed it. Together they created something that would live beyond them, something that could shelter others. That winter the structure was built. They opened it quietly. No press, no attention, just a sign near the door. The house that grew back. It became a space for survivors, for caretakers, for anyone learning to feel again. Jonathan taught piano to a teenage boy who hadn't spoken since his parents died. Isla led quiet garden walks for women healing from violence. They didn't do it for praise. They did it because they had learned that silence can be sacred, but only when chosen, not when it is forced by pain. One night, long after the visitors had gone, they sat on the bench overlooking the sea. He turned to her. I used to think touch would break me. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and now he wrapped his arm around her. Now I know it's what brought me back. She closed her eyes. They didn't speak again that evening. They didn't need to. Some love doesn't need words. It only needs two people willing to show up. Again and again, without promises, just presence. Months passed and the house by the cliffs, no longer stood as a monument to isolation, but as proof that even silence could bloom if someone watered it with enough care. The towel, once just a folded piece of fabric on a hook, remained in its place not as a symbol of shame or fear, but as a quiet marker of the moment everything began to change. Jonathan often walked past it and smiled, not because it reminded him of the man he used to be, but because it reminded him of the man he chose to become. Isla still rose early, made tea with too much honey, and hummed while she walked barefoot through the garden. Her sister had stabilized. The treatments had worked. Sometimes Anna visited, sitting beside Isla on the bench and watching the sea with the same grateful silence her sister once clung to for survival. They didn't talk about the pain anymore, not because it had vanished, but because they had woven it into something larger than themselves. Healing was no longer a destination, it was a practice, a daily decision. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, casting the world in that golden softness only known to those who have waded through storms, Jonathan sat beside Isla and asked her a question he had never dared to voice before. What if you had never come back? She didn't look at him. Instead, she looked out at the sea and answered quietly, "Then you might still be here, but you wouldn't really be living." He nodded slowly, her words settling deep in his chest. "And you," she asked, "would you have ever come after me if I hadn't left?" He thought about it, about the way fear had once governed every corner of his life, about the way her absence had been the only thing loud enough to wake him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm glad you made me find out." She smiled. "Sometimes we need to lose the light to realize we can carry it ourselves." He turned to her. "And sometimes we need someone to hand us a towel while we're standing alone in the dark." They laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because it was true. The kind of truth that lives between scars. They sat together in silence, not as two people afraid of noise, but as two people who had finally learned that presence was louder than words. The house behind them stood still, glowing from within. The garden rustled with the sound of wind moving gently through leaves, and the world in its quiet, breathless way felt full again. They didn't go back to how things were. They built something new, together, because sometimes home isn't a place. It's the person who stays when everyone else walks away. It's the one who hands you a towel not just to dry off, but to remind you that you're still here, still human, still worth being touched.